Can we hear me? Oh, okay. Apparently we can hear me very well. Big fluff ball. Hey Justin, how are you? Can you hear me and I'm also not blowing your eardrums out? Is our audio decent? The kids are resisting a nap. Good. Let me go over here. Hopefully that wasn't deafening. Welcome. The volume's fine. Okay, wonderful. I turned it down a little because I felt like it might have been just a little bit too much. Screen. I don't know. Don't mind that. I'll just keep the phone down here so I don't mess with it. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in here. I may not get to chats like in the very moment because I'm going to try to do a thing. Hey Sam, how you doing, dear? I'm going to try to at least get through like the slides before I reply to comments. So if it seems I'm ignoring you for a moment, I'm not. I'm just going to at least get through the slide where I'm at. Um, Before I don't want to stop like through every single slide. So, because I'm gonna try to make this live on as like a regular VOD as well. So, but I'm so glad you guys have joined me. Welcome. And I do want to put an official trigger warning. There's going to be at least one, albeit very censored graphic image, and anything that we might go into is bound to be triggering to anybody who might be triggered by such a conversation. So I'm not gonna like continuously, trigger warning. This is gonna be a very frank and open discussion about abortion. If you have trauma related to abortion in one way or another, um, maybe don't join us in real time and take care of yourself. Totally understand, and I love you so much. There's just some things we're going to talk about today. We're going to very, very briefly dip into Roe versus Wade and Dobbs, which overturned Roe versus Wade, what the states have done since then, the laws that they've passed, how often abortion is actually occurring, at least their best guess, the cost of abortion, both financially, emotionally, some people's motivations, and some arguments that the pro choice amongst us could use, maybe to try to influence somebody out of such a decision, or at least out of supporting such a decision. Some statistics, what an abortion looks like, or at least a child, um, and what it means, how safe they really are, my personal views, how my views have changed, why, and just some closing thoughts. Hey, so glad to see you, Pancake. Welcome. So, for anybody unaware, I'm vehemently pro life. I was not always that way. I used to be very pro choice, as a matter of fact, in my younger liberal days. And over time, of course, having children of my own, struggling with infertility for a short time, etc., a lot has changed in my view of abortion. Also, finding God and having a relationship with Him again, there's been a lot that's changed and influenced my views and kind of literally made me 180 from where I used to be. So that's just a brief snippet. And for those who don't know, this is a very, very, very brief history of Roe versus Wade. Um, there was two women. There was Roe and Wade. Norma McCorvey was Jane Roe, quote unquote, of Roe, um, who she challenged the Texas law that made abortion illegal, except when the mother's life was in danger over her own abortion and her potential prosecution. She took it all the way to the Supreme Court when she was found guilty. And in a 7-2 decision, by the way, just a little side note of all men, just saying, not that it really matters, they recognized her constitutional right to an abortion, which I have fundamentally so many problems with. Constitutional right to abortion sounds crazy to me, but that's what they decided, that your constitutional rights of self-governance and privacy protected both your right to have an abortion and ever have to tell anybody, basically. The court argued that the right to privacy implied in the 14th Amendment extends to a woman's decision to terminate a pregnancy. And then, basically, with that ruling, it legalized abortion nationwide in the entire continental US and significantly impacted abortion laws across the United States, because before then, each state had their own provisions toward abortion. And before Roe versus Wade, it was almost unilaterally illegal in the United States. There were only a few states that were where it was decriminalized, although not legal. So, another interesting side note. Hi, Barbie. And then on June 24th of 2022, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade in the case Dobbs v. Jackson, Women's Health Organization, ending, praise be to God, the federal right to abortion, meaning that individual states now have the authority to regulate or ban abortion. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but when Dobbs happened and they overturned Roe versus Wade, oh, the liberals went crazy all over social media, all over the mainstream media, everyone you probably knew in your personal life, all over Facebook. I couldn't even get on social media for a week because all I heard was how now abortion is going to be illegal from day one of pregnancy, the moment you find out, and oh, so many women are going to die and it's going to be horrible. And I don't think a lot of the people who were speaking on the issue even truly understood what it meant for that decision to be overturned, or truly understood that it didn't mean automatically abortion was illegal in the United States, but in fact that the states now can make the decision. So I always found that very interesting, shall we say, which is, the loudest voices are not always the most educated. I feel like that's kind of that's not unique, especially in these arguments. So, speaking of what did happen after Roe versus Wade, well, as of the end of 2024, so this isn't the newest data, but the most accurately newest that I found so far. As you can see here in the red, these are states where abortion is banned. The dark orange is where there is a gestational limit between 6 and 12 weeks, and so on and so forth. Lighter is 18 to 22. Light blue, limit at or near viability, or no gestational limit. Which means, I mean, if we could I should have done every single state, but it would have been too much. Those blue states that you see, those very dark blue states, literally have legalized abortion until birth. That's what that means. And I want to be very, very clear on this, because a lot of liberals are like, oh, this doesn't happen. This never happens. That's not actually legal everywhere. It absolutely is. In 9 states and DC, go figure, right? Abortion is legal up until birth. And anybody that wants can try to argue that, but that's a fact. Am I saying it happens every day? No. Am I saying it could happen? Absolutely. So that's really terrifying. Barbie says, I'm so tired of hearing my body, my right. Yes, you have control over your body, but what about the rights of the other life in your belly? Yes, that's exactly right. The my body, my choice thing, really, that's really where it ends any type of intellectual debate, in my opinion, because it's just simply not your body. It is someone else that's inside your body, but it's a unique human life completely separate of yours with their own cells, their own eye color, and fingernails and toenails. This is not, this is not your body. It is within your body, but it's not your body indeed. And then I just went through some of these, those that banned abortion. I didn't do every single one because that would have been a whole lot. But I was just curious to myself personally, of the states that did ban abortion. Um, like what's up with that? What are the laws, the nitty gritty of the details, if you will? So here's Idaho. Their trigger law, which anytime you see these trigger law, quote unquote, that just means it was a law that was triggered by the Dobbs decision. So it was a state law that was already in place that had basically been wiped off the map because federally abortion was legalized, but it triggered to go back into effect once that decision was overturned, right? So here in Idaho, a judge blocked part of the state's abortion ban on August 24, 2022, ruling that doctors cannot be prosecuted for performing abortions in medical emergencies. And here we have South Dakota. They voted on Amendment G, which would have amended the state's constitution to state the government could only prohibit abortion after the end of the second trimester. Pardon me. The measure did not pass. Indiana, complete abortion ban. Kentucky initially went into effect but was temporarily blocked by courts. However, the temporary stay was lifted on August the 1st. Happy birthday to me of that year. Mine's the 4th. Abortion ban went into effect on West Virginia September 16, 2022. Pre-Roe ban blocked by courts. However, it was a different abortion ban, a different bill that had gone through in West Virginia. Oklahoma's trigger law, 24th of 2022. SB 612, signed by the governor April the 12th, went into effect August 25th. Increased criminal penalties associated with abortion. We like to see that. Arkansas, trigger law went into effect June the 24th after Attorney General certified the decision, which basically, yep, I agree. Alabama, their abortion ban went into effect June 24th of 2022. Mississippi, July 7th, 2022. Texas, the pre-Roe ban in effect had previously been blocked by courts, but state Supreme Court allowed it to go into effect July 1st. And the trigger law also increased criminal and civil penalties associated with abortion. Louisiana temporarily blocked it, then it was lifted, blocked again. Trigger ban went into effect once again, 7/29/2022. So here we see they keep and we knew that the states would fight this tooth and nail, a lot of them, even our more conservative states, because no matter where you fall on most political issues, one of the few truly polarizing issues today is going to be abortion. Even amongst the conservative community, there are many people that are somewhere in the gray, that are not 100% pro-life, right? So we're not surprised by this. And of course, my own home state of Tennessee is officially completely red. There's an abortion ban from conception in the state of Tennessee. So my next question was, how many abortions are occurring, right? Which is something we touched on a little bit in our last conversation. And most of this data comes from the web where the and even Planned Parenthood itself. These are very reputable sources. These aren't, right-wing media, just FYI. The most recent data estimates more than 1 million abortions occurred in the US in 2023 alone. And this is after abortion bans, which is kind of terrifying, right? 3 different organizations currently track abortion volume at the state and federal level. Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC, the Guttmacher Institute, and the Society for Family Planning. The CDC has been collecting abortion data for decades, but this is important. Several states do not provide data to the federal government. Is that not a little bit terrifying to anybody else? So there are states in this thing that don't even report their data. So We could hope those would be red states, but possibly not. All these things that I keep finding out make me truly wonder what the numbers really are, right? Reporting to the CDC is in fact voluntary. Again, why? Terrifying, right? There's also a 2 to 3 year time lag until the data becomes publicly available. So this means our best guesses are years behind being anywhere close to accurate, right? They gather this data and it takes them years to release it publicly. Not to mention the fact, if you remember, or if you were here for our first discussion, we listened to a man, I cannot remember the doctor's name, it escapes me right now, but he is an ex-abortionist turned pro-life advocate. He's an OBGYN that performed over 1,600 abortions. And he said of those 1,600 abortions, he reported less than 600 because he only ever reported the abortions he had to report that he performed in the hospital, like later trimester abortions or emergency induction abortions, things like that he was forced to report. Those were the only abortions he ever reported. Any that he did in his private practice or at the abortion clinic, he never reported to anyone. And when the interviewer asked him, do you think that's a common practice? He said, I don't have to think. I know that's a common practice. It's something that we would discuss. Us OBGYNs and people who worked in the abortion clinics would joke about how terrified or aghast people might be if they found out that abortion takes place 10 times more than they thought. That is terrifying, right? So then looking at that number, knowing most OBGYNs only report most abortionists, let me rephrase, that perform an abortion won't report it unless they're absolutely mandated to do so. And then knowing even when it's reported, it could be years before we see the numbers. What really is the number? Then going back to the bans, several states have passed laws to protect abortion access for their residents and expand access to people seeking abortions from other states, which have contributed in part to the increase in a number of abortions in those states compared to pre-Dobbs timeframe. 12 states require state-regulated private plans to cover abortion, many without cost sharing, and 20 Medicaid programs use state-only funds to cover nearly all medically necessary abortions. Interesting. And we wonder who pays for abortions? 23 states passed shield laws intended to reduce the legal risk for clinicians who provide abortion care to patients who live in states where abortion is banned or restricted. Because the interstate travel rate for abortion care nearly doubled 2020 to 2023, with Illinois, North Carolina, New Mexico, and Kansas experiencing the highest volume of out-of-state abortion patients in 2023. Hey Karen, how are you, darling? So glad to see you. Welcome in. So that's also a terrifying fact, right? While the abortion volume in the US dropped immediately following Dobbs, which overturned Roe versus Wade, the total number of abortions nationally has increased compared to the pre-Dobbs numbers 2 years following the ruling. And I wonder why that is, right? The most recent data shows there were more than 1 million abortions in 2023, slightly up from 930,160 abortions in 2020. For most of the decade prior to the Dobbs ruling, there was a steady decline in abortion rates nationally, with a slight uptick in the years just before the ruling. The upward trend in abortion volume is likely due to a combination of reasons, including, this is terrifying, expanded telehealth capacity, the ability to mail medication abortion pills to patients, and the lower charges for telehealth abortions through virtual clinics compared to in-person care. Medication abortion via telehealth accounted for 20% of all abortions in June of 2024. That means, and you ask yourself, right, so why have they increased, especially if we're making laws to literally criminalize them? That's why. Telehealth has brought our doctors into our homes, and for many people, it can be a blessing, especially those who are perhaps agoraphobic, right? Stuck in their home for some reason, or even socially anxious, or even a busy mama of five, right? There are many reasons telehealth is a good thing. I don't think abortion care needs to be a telehealth procedure. Maybe I'm crazy, right? And to think that 20% of all women that had an abortion via getting pills mailed to their home after seeing a telehealth provider is terrifying, especially when we look at the numbers of women who are harmed by those pills, which we'll do in just one moment. Then we look into what about the specificity of the bans, right? In Texas, their ban says the abortion, the physician must determine the abortion is necessary based on their reasonable medical judgment, which is a standard that leaves physicians in a legally vulnerable situation and understandably reluctant to certify a pregnancy as qualifying for a life or health exception. The reluctance stems from the concern of being found guilty of violating the law if the court relies on the testimony of another medical expert that say treating physicians didn't meet the standard for reasonable medical judgment. Meaning, if this person were to be taken to court to be prosecuted for performing an abortion, even if it was in the case of a life or death situation to save the mom, then if they were to put somebody else on the stand that disagreed, that said, oh, I don't think that it was medically necessary, they could be prosecuted, right? Well, this is exactly the problem with doing something half ass, right? I'm just going to be blunt about it. If we decriminalize abortion or we criminalize it under only certain circumstances, this will always be a problem. Because when you have these exceptions, right, who defines the exception? People, just like you and me. They're doctors, but they're just people. They have the same ability to fail at making a right decision, the same ability to struggle with making a decision as you or I do. Their capacity for humanity is the same as you and I. They are fallible. And as long as we have these laws or bans that still allow abortion under X, Y, or Z, we're going to see unfortunate cases of women that don't get the help that they do need. As in some of these cases where women already had lost a child, had a miscarriage, and a doctor was really silly and dumb and did not know how to handle it, because some of these things can be confusing, right? So, what is the solution? If you ask me, it's a heartbeat bill, it's a complete ban. And a lot of people think I'm heartless for that, but I don't see another way to take away the people that will slip through the cracks in the gray area. I don't see another way to fix that. Hey, so glad to see you, Dave Nato. So glad to see you. And then this is also, by the way, this is a left wing media article, which is why it favors these facts. And I just wanted to be very fair to all sides when I was doing this research. Additionally, some states ban exceptions when the pregnancy is threatening the pregnant person's health, when the pregnancy is the result of rape or incest, and when there is a lethal fetal anomaly. However, in practice, these exceptions have proven to be unworkable except in the most extreme circumstances. I do acknowledge there have been some unfortunate circumstances. I did a short on that before. A few women whose doctors committed malpractice. It's really that simple. However, I also see where there could be confusion with these laws, and these doctors are in a position where they have to choose between their livelihood, their practice, their license, how they feed their family, and helping someone, but potentially losing all that if they violate this one line of the code, right? Again, the only way to prevent that is to make it a sweeping ban. People think that's heartless. I don't see another way. I don't see a way to prevent the gray without removing it. Does that make sense? Oh, and speaking of exceptions, by the way, these are exceptions to the state abortion bans and early gestational limits. As of December, here we have life. All of these states make an exception for the life of the mother, right? Here we have health. If I don't know what particular parameters each state has to meet this particular standard, like the health of the mother. You could really argue every pregnancy, put your health in the drain as a mom. But these are the states that have some health exceptions. My state of Tennessee is also in here. Agreed, Barbie. Then here are rape or incest exceptions, and I'll address that later. I agree with my state. I don't believe we should have one, and I'll explain why in a moment. And fetal fatal anomalies. Again, I don't believe there should be one, and people think that I'm heartless for that. But for one, I'm consistent. You can't deny that I'm consistent in my beliefs all the way across the board. For two, I don't believe it's our job to decide how many miracle children have you heard of that were not supposed to survive X or Y or Z, right? If I were to have believed doctors, I would have lost my mom years before I did, because I would have pulled the plug on her 2 comas ago, before she died almost a year ago, right? I was never supposed to have a healthy child, and I had 2. Doctors don't always know what the hell they're talking about. It's that simple. And medical advancements are made every single day. You cannot tell me that there's anyone who can tell you 100,000% your child will die, or they will live a month, or they will live a day. Now, there are very, very, very rare exceptions to that, like anencephaly, right? Where the heart is outside of the body. That's incompatible with life. There's no way you're going to be able to live through that. I understand that. But that's 1 in millions. People who are pro-abortion would like you to believe those are at least, they are happening enough to at least justify to make it an exception. And I don't believe that's the case. Speaking of exceptions, I've mentioned this statistic before. This is from the Charlotte Logia Institute, who study abortion. They're one of the people who do lots and lots of research. Their website's at the bottom. You can fact check me. And here we have reasons women seek abortion. 0.4% rape and incest. 0.3% risk to the woman's life or major bodily function. 2.2% other physical health concerns. It's not really specified. 1.2% abnormality in the unborn baby. And 95.9% elective and unspecified reasons. Convenience. Let's be real. Let's be honest, right? Convenience. So before this big study that was just released earlier this year, we were told it was between 1 and 2%. Now we know it's a little over 4. So we'll say 95%, and that's being generous, of abortions are elective. We understand that now. Now, when we look toward legislation, laws, bans on abortion, that's the lens we need to look at it through. These exceptions are not things that happen every day, right? If you're talking about 1 million abortions, right? 1 million. How many of those, I'm not great at math, somebody help me out, would be 950,000, is that right? That were elective, and 50,000 would have been other specified reasons. When you look at it that way, it's a lot harder to justify, even for the terrible, terrible exceptions to the rule. It's hard to justify not going forward with the ban, in my opinion. And then to talk about the cost of an abortion. In 2023, we looked anywhere from $563 to $650 all the way up to $1,000 for a surgical abortion. Medication abortion started at $500. However, at the end of 2023, as we can see here, the cost of a medication abortion from virtual clinics was $150. And costs on Plan B and C range from as low as $25 for an abortion pill mailed to you without clinician consultation. Never even had to talk to a doctor. And $150 for abortion by mail with a clinical consultation. So $25 to $1,000, somewhere in there, right? $25, and you never even have to talk to a doctor. That's interesting. So who does pay for these abortions, right? Because they tell us that we need better access to abortion care and they're so expensive, people cannot afford them. Well, there's abortion funds, independent organizations that help pay for some of the cost of abortion services, medical care, medical care and even travel accommodations if needed. And these networks reported receiving 39% more requests for support and 59% increases in donations after the Dobbs ruling, right? States can choose whether abortion coverage is included or excluded in private plans, but not state funding. And let's look at this. Prior to Dobbs, a quarter or 26% of abortion patients use Medicaid to pay for abortion services, while 11% use private insurance and 60% out of pocket. So at least a quarter of abortions are paid for by tax dollars. That's unequivocally the case, right? And so what do we think, these people, us, who are paying for abortion, what do we think about it? Well, this study said that the majority of women in the US support a law establishing a nationwide right to abortion and oppose a law establishing a nationwide ban at 15 weeks. Interesting. But then, this is a thing, see, when you read these studies or you hear of these facts, quote unquote, you got to dig a little bit deeper, right? And here we see at the bottom, note, among women ages 18 to 49, asterisk, women includes those who selected woman as their gender, as well as those who identify as non-binary, transgender, or another gender, and chose to answer the female set of questions. Because here's the thing, right? This was not some huge survey. This was a questionnaire given to 1,000 quote unquote women. Don't even get me started. And of these women, whoever choose to identify as a woman, this is the results that we get. Isn't that interesting? And then we look at another survey. Majority of women support law to protect patients' right to access abortion in emergencies, even travel for abortion care. Interesting. However, then you look at the second part of the study, and here we have 35% they believe in prohibiting clinics that receive federal funding from providing abortions or even referring patients to abortion providers. Furthermore, 27% believe in banning the use of mifepristone or a medication abortion nationwide. And here's the thing, these are the numbers we're being given freely, right? From the left, basically. These are all Planned Parenthood, sister corporations who are going to try and fluff the numbers the best they can. And if they're telling us 35% of the population believe that clinics that get taxpayer dollars shouldn't provide abortions, or that mifepristone should not be prescribed to cause an abortion, I think it's probably more, right? So we're seeing the tide turning, in my personal opinion. And as we can see, most women, and indeed most people, support a ban on abortion after at least 15 weeks. Why? I believe it's because we've been made to believe, as people, that life somehow magically comes in at a certain point in the womb, and that magical point where the light switches on, quote unquote, forms a hard line for most people. They believe the baby is indeed just a clump of cells up until a certain point, and don't want to impose on a woman's autonomy to protect what they deny is, as of yet, a human life. What's interesting is how quickly people change their minds when the procedures of abortion are graphically explained to them. When the entire truth is told to them, especially by those who used to perform these procedures, very few people hold fast to the idea that abortion is still acceptable at any stage of pregnancy. These sick people have lied to us. Life begins at conception, a unique and whole human life worthy of protection, and snuffing it out is nothing short of murder. So let's take a look. Here we have, at week 13, the preborn baby's fingerprints are visible. The child's organs are visible through his or her thin skin. The baby is roughly 3 inches long, while at week 16, the child's toenails begin to form, and his or her face and limbs are much more developed. The baby's heart is pumping roughly 25 quarts of blood every day and will continue as the child develops in the womb. Many mothers feel the baby move at this point of pregnancy. Here at week 20, the child's nervous system is developed enough to feel pain. Research by the University of Toronto shows the baby at this stage can feel pain in the womb even with greater intensity than adults. Almost all mothers feel the baby move at this point in pregnancy. Here's week 24. The baby is roughly a foot long, and his or her brain is developing rapidly. The child's lungs are also developing into their branch-like structure. At this stage, almost all babies can survive outside the mother if given proper medical support. And see, even further, at week 20, 2 children have. I'm not saying it was easy or it's a normative thing that's happening, but there are bleeding edges of medicine where some of these children's hospitals have been able to save 20-week-old babies outside of the womb. 2. Not 2,000, not 2 million, but if we can even save just 1, isn't their life worth protecting in the womb at that point as well? I think so. Make no mistake, every abortion ends a human life. 2 people go into that doctor's office or clinic, but only 1 person comes out. The medical community is almost unanimous at this point on when life begins, at the moment of conception. When a fertilized egg is implanted and splits into 2 and then 4 and then 8 cells almost infinitely to form a unique human being, that's life. And when you understand that, any and all possible arguments for abortion cease to make any sense or hold any weight morally or ethically. When you accept that, no circumstances can make it okay. We must also understand that all these exceptions people like to bring up as their last chance to defend the indefensible make up less than 5%, I need to change that, of procedures. The vast majority of abortions are elective, and in a civilized society, that must be unacceptable. Speaking of the abortion pill, for years, those that push the abortion pill have claimed it's safe. In fact, on its very own packaging, it's claimed to be safer than household Tylenol. However, new studies have exposed what pro-life advocates have known all along. It's incredibly dangerous. De-identified insurance claims data, so they're hiding who they are, shows a 10.9% rate of serious adverse events for chemical abortion, not less than 0.5% as claimed on the mifepristone label. It's not safe for women. So not only will 1 in 10 women, or 11 in 100, have a dire circumstance, a health complication, but they have been lying to us all along. And in fact, the risk of harm is 20% more than they ever divulged. That's interesting, isn't it? If only there was a way that we could have seen that coming. This trigger warning here is at the bottom, because I said I wasn't going to trigger warning this and trigger warning that, but there's about to be a photo that is graphic. If you feel you cannot handle it, please come back in a moment, because it's ugly. This is the truth of abortion. This is one of 14 photos you can see for yourself. Not blurred out, not censored, at createdequal.org. I had to censor it and could barely look at it for too long. These are photos from abortionists, people who perform the procedures. Pro-life advocates have leaked. They're real. They're very real. And I mean, what else needs to be said? Can you tell me that's not a life? That that's not a human? Hillary Clinton once said, "I've met thousands and thousands of pro-choice men and women. I have never met anyone who is pro-abortion." I disagree heavily, but even taking that into account, should this be a distinction we make, right? I know, personally, even if it's not pro-choice versus pro-abortion, even if it's pro-choice personally, ethically, and legally, see, the line I used to draw is different than the line I draw today. However, I know I feel a lot better about the line I draw today. These are a few quotes that I found to be touching, if you will, for the pro-life stance. "A person's a person, no matter how small." That's the one and only Dr. Seuss. "Every life is a gift and has something unique to contribute to the world." That's Pope Francis. "Abortion does not kill a potential human person. It kills a human person with great potential." Author unknown. Little cutie. Consider for just a moment, if you are pro-choice, that you're wrong in your belief. What would that mean for the ideals you're supporting? If the pro-life stance is wrong, we have pushed for children to be protected at the cost of inconveniencing some women, right? However, on the other hand, if you're wrong, you've co-signed the mass murder of our most precious resource, our very future. Preborn lives matter. Period. Look at them. They each deserve the basic human rights we all enjoy. They deserve the dignity of life. They cannot speak up for themselves, defend themselves, and that's why we must defend them. Thank you for joining me today. As I previously stated, I completely understand these are hard conversations to have. Pictures and videos are hard to see. The concepts are hard to wrap our heads around. But we must. In a civilized society, abortion has no place. Many experts in the field agree there is almost no medical necessity for abortion. In most cases, the point at which continuing the pregnancy would endanger the mother would put her well within the acceptable range of early delivery. Whether induction or C-section, most babies and mothers can be saved this way. Don't believe the lies you've been told. Several babies have survived outside of the womb as early as 20 weeks, and many at 24 weeks and beyond. This takes special care and medical support, but it is possible. As for rape and incest, let me say this. I truly hate that any young girl or woman goes through that, but studies have already proven that having an abortion is likely to further her trauma. Aborting an innocent life will never undo the evil these victims suffer. It will only stain their very own souls by traumatizing them further via the abortion process. So where do I stand? Today, I can confidently say that I am a proud pro-lifer with every ounce of my heart. Even once I got there, it took longer to be okay with the idea of abortion bans. The way I used to see it was like this. Even though I personally feel it's wrong, who am I to legislate other women's bodies? But here's the rub with that argument. We legislate other people's bodies all day, every day. We tell you that you can't murder or rape, all the way down to you can't speed or drink and drive. In some even severe circumstances, when you're deemed a danger to yourself or others, there's even ways to force you into programs to get help against your very own will. See, that's the thing. Because in a civilized society, we've long agreed there are certain infringements upon our rights and freedoms we find acceptable to protect the general public. There's many examples to this. And if we accept and even champion those other examples, how could we not champion saving our most precious and defenseless citizens, our children? Thank you again for taking the time to listen and or participate in our discussion. Ta-da! That was my presentation. I hope some of you gained something from that. Sorry, going back through, I just saw the picture again. I know that it's very graphic. Like I said, I tried to censor it as much as possible. I think just like watching the videos we watched together last time, it's sometimes necessary not to be gratuitous. Not to just be gruesome to be gruesome. Thank you, Pancake. I'm so glad you've joined us. I'm so glad to have you. We don't want to be gratuitous and be gruesome for gruesome's sake. I feel, especially when you speak to people on the pro-choice side, I feel like they should be able to look at what they're championing, right? They should be able to say, this is what I believe, and to look at a baby being ripped apart limb from limb and say, okay, I recognize that that's what's happening, but a woman's right to choose and her own bodily autonomy is worth more to me than that human life. And if that's how they feel, okay, but most of them don't. Thank you, Pancake. That means a lot. Thanks, Caroline. I really do appreciate it. That's, I feel like a lot of people that I speak with that are pro-choice because as a society, we're lied to be quite frank, and we're given like a sugar-coated version of the truth. It's like these people who say it's not a baby, it's just a clump of cells, or even those who say yes, it's a baby, but it's not conscious, it's not going to be able to feel pain, yada yada yada. Abortion, I can remember even growing up in health class, is always minimized, right? To be like no big deal. And how is that the case? How have we made it in our society where, people think of taking another human life as, well, so long as this human life won't be inconveniencing you? It's crazy to me. And like I briefly touched on, for a long time, I was very much morally and ethically pro life, but it took me a while to get over that hump of where I said, okay, let's do something about it, basically. And I felt, no matter how I thought, because I'm libertarian at heart, and I feel like it's a jump to say, okay, I feel like this was right or wrong, to get to, okay, so this is how everybody else should be forced to live, right? But when you really think about it, it's not that far of a leap because, like I said, we do that every day, right? We come together as a civilized society, and we set up these rules and these expectations to help run our society smoothly, yes, but also to further our society and to try and set up our citizens for success and prosperity, right? And happiness. And good to see you again, Dave Nato. And what kind of society are we if we don't protect the most defenseless? So that's my thoughts on that. And I've been researching for days to try and pull a little from here, a little from there. I wanted to see. It's really, really hard. Go into your Google machine or your DuckDuckGo or your Bing or whatever you might use and try to find some recent statistics on abortion. It is incredibly difficult. And finding the information that said it's years before these bodies that govern abortions and their statistics and collect all the data, it's years before they release that data, makes a lot of it make sense, because I was having so much trouble finding any kind of data from anything before 2022 or 2023. Basically, nothing after that, or not before, from after, from this year, from 2024 even, was really difficult to find. So, you know, that was another challenge I ran into. And why is that? Why doesn't every state have to report these abortion numbers? Why is it years before these numbers are released? This whole business of abortion is incredibly, incredibly shady. A wise old man once said, "Fools, make sure you do unbiased research to read everything possible." Exactly. And see, and that's why I said I looked at things from Planned Parenthood themselves, from the WHO and the WEF and um, World Health Organization and the CDC. I really tried to get a little sampling of, some left wing, some right wing, some center, non-biased sources, if they really exist. I really tried to gather information from several different places because, you know, I find everybody has a bias and it will come out whether you want it to or not. And so even, if somebody tries to present a data set or a research paper, if you will, unbiased, I feel like there's going to be some definite bias that creeps in. So you have to kind of compile from everywhere to be able to get more of a true picture. It's like there's your side and that side, and somewhere in the middle you'll find the truth, type of deal. I appreciate that you stuck with me, Caroline. I know, oh, Dave Nato. I know you, like myself, have a very um, real connection to the unborn and the preborn. I know you and I have been through similar things with fertility and babies, and I won't get into anything further than that because you know what I mean. And that also probably paints my bias just a little bit. Um, I shan't deny that. But I find all life is precious and um, just worth protecting, and it's really that simple to me. I mean, I feel like people who support abortion really want to make the issue complicated, and I don't feel like it has to be complicated at all. You know, they're not fetuses, they're babies, and they deserve a chance at life, and it's that simple. It does, and I keep seeing this really, really silly saying, like, all over the place where it's like, "No uterus, no opinion." And that is really starting to drive me crazy, right? We touched on a little bit, last abortion-related live, pardon me. Sorry, I tried not to deafen you. Excuse me. About, should the father have a say in abortion? We went through this whole discussion. We went down a rabbit hole about that because, for one, the man will certainly be, um, they'll be expected to be responsible if the baby is born, correct? So why would they not be included in the decision? That's one. And for two, so are men just never supposed to have any type of opinion on something they don't directly relate to? Because that's pretty silly, Men are lawmakers. They deal with all types of things that they themselves may never experience, and they're expected to be able to relate. Yet when it comes to abortion, it's different. I mean, it just kind of, um, it just blows my mind. Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. I respect that as well. I appreciate that. I did. On our last live, we watched two videos. Um, One was a graphic representation of different stages of abortion, like what they do in a first, a second, and a third trimester abortion. And there were 2 or 3 men who left. They couldn't literally handle watching it. And I barely could. I mean, I was in tears the first 2 times I saw that video preparing for the live. It was very graphic and upsetting. And the other part of it was Margaret Sanger's history, the founder of Planned Parenthood, and her love for eugenics, and how she is literally the person who inspired Hitler. A lot of people don't know this. There's a reason the first Planned Parenthoods were put in the inner cities and still to this day are usually found in, more inner city type areas and cater to communities considered to be minorities, because that was always the intention from the very beginning. It was a plan of eugenics, and sadly, minority communities are playing right into that hand. Well, yes, I done had a whole life too about men and men's mental health. Dave, I need to do another one. Maybe we'll do a panel discussion. But um, I mean, I totally understand the whole premise of, like, I'm just gonna shut up and support my lady, and I can respect that as well. Um, I do think a certain part of it is, like, when do we get um, galvanized into action? And I feel like for a lot of people, unfortunately, that comes when something tragic befalls you that makes that particular topic personal to you in a way that it wasn't before. And I'm hoping maybe having some of these discussions, we can at least begin to make people think, right? Because having real discussions is taking action, right? We're not picketing out of the street, but I formatted this live, hopefully, and definitely the last live, in such a way where if you had a pro-choice friend and you would like to possibly change their mind, it was the kind of video you could send to said friend. It's not a 6 hour long thing. My last live was like an hour. So far, this one's, let me look. an hour long, and I'll end here in just a moment as well. It's, pretty much bite-sized podcast length. There's facts, there's evidence, it's not just feelings and opinions. And can be how we take action as well. No, I totally appreciate that, and I always appreciate the men that show up to have these discussions, because I do think society pushes the fact that men are not allowed to have an opinion. And I personally disagree with that. And I do appreciate that you come to participate and to give us your opinion, because your opinion does matter to me. Even if you were to completely disagree and be pro choice, that opinion would still matter to me. I would still respect it, because, I think it takes more balls to show up to a room where everybody fundamentally disagrees with you and give your perspective, because that can be scary and intimidating, even for the big, manliest, toughest, burliest men of all, or women. you know it's tough to play to a room that may not completely agree, if you will. A one night stand that results in a pregnancy could be classified as abandonment. My body, my choice could result in a man looking like a piece of shit because they have no idea. The system in general is faulty. These laws, the ability to account for your statistics after abortions. I completely agree. I completely agree, Caroline. I don't think education is key to our future, but yet we fail to educate current issues. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to educate myself further. And how do we fix this problem, right? Because you're completely right. I think realistic sex ed is a big one, because not all children are spoken with or to by their parents. Issues that are represented in our lives today or even tomorrow, as far as abortions. Yeah, and that's another thing that they talk about the exceptions, but we see most abortions are in fact elective. These are from polls that these women are participating in that are having them. And I didn't get into, there's a couple of there's not a whole lot of data, like actual research on abortion regret. There was a study that just came out from Iceland, I believe, and is literally in the process of peer review right now, but we don't have a lot of numbers on that, which is another thing. There has to be lots of abortion regret, right? Why don't we have more numbers on that? Well, probably because it would make us look at it a little differently. Um, and regardless of how I feel, um, like I have a past. I have friends that have a past of infertility, of abortion itself, of even multiple abortions. I'm not a friend. I know a girl that had 3 abortions. And when she came to me to cry about her third, I finally said something. And this, mind you, was when I was still very pro choice. And I said, listen, I offered to drive you to your first. I side eyed you about your second. And at this point, I'm going to tell you, I don't agree. I feel like maybe you should be using condoms instead of the abortion clinic. And it's kind of fucked up. And that effectively ended our friendship. But, it is what it is. Oh, sure. And me as well. And me as well, Caroline. And that's a whole nother thing that we feel like they're dirty little secrets, right? And maybe we can have a discussion about that one day. Maybe, if we're both comfortable or whatever. And that's me also. And I think you're allowed to vehemently defend or even partake in something, and a year later or a month later or a decade later change your mind, right? That's not like it's some type of flip-flopping or two-facedness. It's called growth. That's what we aim for, right? We do better when we know better, right? My opinion on the topic is torn. I believe big on a person's freedom and against government infringing on one's freedom. I tend to agree. But that being said, I'm not a fan of abortion either. I'm on the fence. That's where I was. Even a few months ago, really, I've listened to a whole lot of debates, and maybe I'll post some of them on my page as well. Listen to a whole lot of scholarly debates, lawyers, doctors, very, very intelligent people debate the issue of abortion because I always feel, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. But actually, sorry, my hands killing me. But the past couple debates I've heard, I have actually heard some interesting points that I had never heard brought up before, or heard anybody attempt to defend them. And I feel like every now and again, one gets me like thinking a little bit and like questioning my decision. But at the end of the day, it always goes back to, for me anyway, one of the last slides, the question that I asked. So let's say I'm wrong, right? Say we have a pro-choice me and a pro-life me, and one of us has to be wrong, right? Because morally one thing is right and one thing is wrong. So say the pro-life me is wrong, and I have been a proponent to save lives, which has inconvenienced women, right? Possibly put some women in danger, like I touched on in that short of mine, perhaps even cost the lives of a few women. Then you look at, say, the pro choice side is wrong. And what is at loss there is literally millions of babies' lives, right? Which position would I rather defend and be wrong about? And I feel like pro-life is that for me, and to each their own. I don't expect everyone to agree with me. Nor would I really want to live in a world where everyone did. That would be quite boring. But, you know, we have what you call Achievement Day on campus. I live in a college town. Students in the fraternities and sororities put out a message where sorority said the whole year without an abortion. Wow. That's crazy. That's craziness, Caroline. Because of my ex-wife's health issues. Right? And that's another thing too. A lot of people, here's my thing about that though. This is my thing. A lot of people argue for like Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, even not the anencephalus, but the encephalitis, the one that's not like deadly, any type of, deadly or really terrible disease, right? A lot of people are proponents of, why bring that life into this world? Why make them suffer, right? However, that sounds a whole lot like eugenics, right? When, where's the line when we start deciding this disabled person or that birth defective, quote unquote, person is literally unworthy of life when we don't draw a hard line and we cross over a potential line to do this one or that one, where does it end? Like that's my fear with that type of argument. Like even for substantial health risks or birth defects is where does it end when we allow that to be our reasoning? It's a first 2 to 5 abortions? Jesus. That makes my heart hurt. Oh my lord. You don't have to shut up. I'm listening. Yep. Decision to keep on. I know that's right. And I admire you for that because it's a hard decision and I feel a lot of people have made an opposite decision of that. And I'm not the one that will tell someone else if their decision is right or wrong because that's not my job, right? I have very strong and passionate beliefs, but I don't believe it's my job to judge or to condemn you. There's only one person that can do that. Um, but I have a lot of respect and admiration. Seeing her grow, she's one of the happiest children. I know. I know, right? And see, that's the funny thing. A lot of people will call people disadvantaged or defective, right? But if you look at cerebral palsy and Down syndrome uh, kids and adults, when they do studies on their happiness, right, their quality of life, when you survey them in large groups, you want to know what's interesting? 90 something percent of them outperform quote unquote, healthy people, mentally healthy, what have you, in happiness and quality of life surveys. As in, like 90 something percent are happy consistently when you or me or Caroline would not be, right? Maybe that's because somehow they're special in a way we just don't get yet. And they're constantly happy. I mean, is that not something else? That's really interesting. Mm. She's a mess. Aren't all kids though? Aren't all kids all freaking mess in one way or another? I'll certainly pray for your family because I know that it's difficult. You know, we all love our kiddos, but it's hard. Um, with any type of unique challenge, it doesn't have to be this defect or that disease. Any unique challenge with kids can be just hard. Parenting is hard. Who am I kidding? Even if you're a perfect parent or you have perfect children, quote unquote, unquote, it's still hard to parent. It's always hard. I know that's right. My mama always told me, oh, honey, you'll pay for your raising when you raise your own. And don't I know it? It's definitely been something else. Oh, but I'll tell you what, I didn't want to keep this too long. Like I said, I wanted to keep it kind of bite-sized, if you will. And so I'm gonna go ahead and get off of here so that we can keep this definitely under an hour and a half. We're at 112 right now. But thank you guys. Thanks to everybody who came to hang out, even if you were just in the background, even if you were just here for a minute. Big, huge shout out to Caroline and NATO Dave over here who shared some great insights with us, a little bit of your opinion, some facts from your own perspective, your own town, experience with your own families. It's always wonderful to have in a conversation like this a little bit more of anecdotal truth, if you will. Thank you, Caroline. I always appreciate having you around. And, thanks for listening to me drone on. Hopefully, it was not terrible. I try to keep, even have my little slides where I want to say something like actually written out so I don't just go on and on and on and on because we know I can ramble. Yes, thank you. Thank you, NATO Dave. He really is dyslexic as hell, isn't he? And thank you. I asked you that earlier. I think maybe you weren't paying attention or something, but then I lost track. I'm so glad. Mwah. I'm so glad that you ate pancake. And all right, I think that's all. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. And I'll see you sometime soon around in these